So we know that a lot of our kiddos who come in here who have selective mutism oftentimes have fears of things like using the bathroom at school, eating at school. And so today we thought it would be really helpful to talk about practical tips and strategies that you can use right now to help your kids handle these fears in a really brave way. But before we talk about that, before we go into the tips and strategies and jump into that, it's really important to understand where these fears come from and develop from over time. So to explain that to you, we're going to talk about something called the cycle of negative reinforcement. And I'm going to use an example to help illustrate this. So I want you to pretend that you have a little kid named Johnny, right? And little Johnny's afraid of something that a lot of our kids are afraid of, which is eating at school. And so to imagine the cycle, right, the first step of it would be that Johnny's prompted to do the thing he's afraid of. So maybe his teacher comes over and says, okay, class, take out your lunch. Or teacher comes over and says, little Johnny, open up your snack. The next step of this is that he's going to become a little bit distressed and inhibit. So for different kids, this will look differently. But for some kids, this might just look like deer in the headlights, I'm going to stare straight back at you. For some kids, it's running away. For some kids, it's just like putting their head in their hands, anxious, nervous. You know your kid's fear response. I'm sure you know it very well. So the next step of this is that the environment sees that. And when I say environment, I mean anyone around Johnny. So teacher sees that Johnny looks anxious, kids see that Johnny looks anxious, and nobody likes to see a child that's afraid. And our natural response is going to be an empathic one. So in most situations, teacher or somebody's going to jump in and do some kind of rescuing. And that might look like teachers saying, it's okay, Johnny, you don't have to have your lunch right now. Or kids saying something like, Johnny doesn't eat lunch, or Johnny doesn't eat at school. And then, everybody feels relief. The teacher feels relief because she doesn't mean to make Johnny feel anxious. And Johnny definitely feels relief because the thing that he's most afraid of right now, which is eating at school, he's not being prompted to do anymore. But now he begins to associate avoiding something with relief. And this can become a very powerful bond. And if you multiply this by the amount of times Johnny's asked to do this a day, days in a week, weeks in a month, months in a year, years in his life, that's a lot of practice of avoiding and feeling relief for the thing that he's afraid of. And so what we really want to do and talk to you guys about doing today is changing your empathic response so that we can reverse this cycle. And Amanda's going to talk to you about a really helpful strategy to do this.
And the way that we break this cycle is through helping kids gradually approach the things that they fear. And the fancy word that we use to describe this is called exposures. Mm-hmm. And we talk to kids about it in a way that we're explaining it as bravery practice. And we use what we call a bravery ladder to help the kids gradually approach the things that they fear and take each step of the way until they're at their goal. And the things that we want to remember when we're creating a bravery ladder is that we want to keep each step simple and stepwise. So we want to start from the easiest exposure and work all the way up to the hardest. And we want to make sure that each step is really clear and concise so that the child knows exactly what they're going to expect and what they're expected to do. We also want to pair each exposure with praise and reward. So we don't want to just wait until we get to the top of the hierarchy, at the top of the bravery ladder, to give them that praise and reward, but we actually want to give that to them at each step of the way. What this does is it helps them feel good about the progress that they've already made, and it helps motivate them to keep going. We also want to avoid jumping rungs, meaning that sometimes it can be really tempting when kids are making such really good progress to jump all the way to the top of something that might be a little bit too soon. So we want to make sure that we're going at the child's pace and moving at a pace that they're really comfortable at. And finally, we always want to make sure we have a plan B. So sometimes when we're creating a bravery ladder, we might start with something that the child might not be ready for just yet. So if we're starting with something that they're refusing to do or that they're not comfortable with trying just yet, that's okay because that just gives us information that we just need to take it back a notch and start with something a little bit more simple and that feels really more doable for them.
Yeah, more manageable. Plan B, Plan C, Plan D, lots of plans. We need a lot of plans. And let's talk about applying this idea of a bravery ladder or exposure to the fears that we're addressing today. which is bathroom and eating. So let's start with bathroom. When you're thinking about making a bravery ladder for your child who's afraid of using the bathroom, you really want to be clear on what is the fear, right? So we're not shooting arrows in the dark. There's a lot of different things that kids can be afraid of when it comes to this. The first thing, which is the most common for our kids, is a fear of verbalizing that they need to use the bathroom. Or there's a social anxiety piece to it of, I'm afraid that everybody's going to be looking at me as I walk across the classroom or raise my hand. That's nerve-wracking. But for other kids, the fear could be more around separation. So for them, it might not, or it could be in addition to the verbal piece, a fear of being away from mom or dad while in the bathroom, or being in a stall on their own without teacher present. That can be scary for our kids. Alternatively, we have some kids who are actually just afraid of the bathroom itself. So like those loud hand dryers, we do not like those. Loud flushers, the toilet, just toileting for our younger kiddos can be scary. So when you're thinking about creating a bravery ladder and practicing, we really want to be clear on what is it that I'm practicing for. So let's use our most common example when we are talking about a bravery ladder. Let's talk about a kid that's afraid of verbalizing and advocating. If you have a child that is afraid of asking to use the bathroom, a great place to start is just having the teacher prompt the child to use the restroom without having any need for verbalizing or asking on the child's part. And the way this would look is teacher goes over to little Johnny and says, Johnny, it's time to use the restroom. Go ahead and walk to the bathroom. This takes away the advocating piece. This takes away the verbalizing piece. For 80% of our kids, this eliminates any of the accidents that we might be having at school. But obviously, we don't want to stay here forever because our goal is that Johnny's able to raise his hand and say, I need to go to the bathroom on his own. So you want to bump up the level of difficulty once Johnny gets comfortable using the restroom at school. And the way you do that is you come up with a signal, a nonverbal signal that he could use. This is a good one. A nonverbal signal he can use at school to help him advocate without the verbal expectation yet. And once he's able to use a nonverbal signal with his teacher, then we could practice the verbal piece of this. And the way that could look is having the teacher go over to Johnny and kind of hand him the script on a silver platter, saying, Johnny, go ahead and tell me I need to use the restroom. That alone can really be helpful for kids just to get the ball rolling on using their voice to state what they need to say. And once he gets comfortable with this, then we want to see, can he do this on his own? Can he go up to the teacher on his own and use the script that we've been practicing to ask to use the restroom? Now, we wouldn't have him yet do that in front of the whole class until he's done it on his own with the teacher without everybody looking at him. And once he's successfully done that, then we can jump up to our final goal, which is raising his hand saying, I need to use the restroom all on his own in front of his peers. But the beauty of this kind of fear ladder and of fear ladders in general is that you're isolating fear so that you're not putting too much demand on your child at one time. Sometimes it feels like they can't do something, when in reality they can if you just separate the things that they're afraid of and practice them one at a time. So let's talk about, in addition to this bravery practice, just some general tips that you want to use in addition to the ladder for kids that are afraid of the restroom. So one is, if you have a kid that's afraid of using the bathroom at school, the bathroom itself, identify a bathroom that they might feel more comfortable using. Some of our kids do really well when we transition to they use the restroom in the nurse's office, and this can be a really great strategy. Additionally, it's really helpful if you come up, for kids that are a little bit further along, if you come up with a cue or something so that they can initiate on their own. So for kids who are ready for it, ready to initiate using the restroom, but they're just having a hard time giving themselves the extra push they might need to ask, coming up with a cue card that you put in their lunchbox or in their backpack that says, when you ask the teacher one time today to use the restroom, you get X reward. And the reward does not have to be monetary. It can be reading an extra book at bedtime, or having special time with mom or dad after school, or extra dessert. And this can give kids the extra little tiny push they might need to advocate on their own. And now Man's going to talk a little bit about fun eating tips.
Yes, so just like Eliana was explaining with bathroom fears, we also want to make sure that when we're creating a bravery ladder around eating fears, that we're really identifying what the specific fear is. So some kids might be really fearful of trying new foods with different tastes, textures, smells. Some kids might have a really hard time eating in front of other people. So they might experience a lot of anxiety when they're eating amongst other peers, adults. And that could be around having people hearing them chew, seeing their teeth, or just watching them eat overall. And some kids, which we know is something that kids with SM really struggle with, is being able to advocate for themselves and ask for what they want. So being able to tell an adult when they're hungry or when they want something to eat. Or maybe if they don't like something and they want something else. So now we're going to go through a sample bravery ladder of a child who's experiencing a lot of anxiety eating in front of other peers. And what's happening is that, let's say this child is refusing to eat anything in school. Our goal for him would be to eat a pretty nice sized meal amongst his peers in the cafeteria. And we know that starting with that might be a little bit too high for him right now, so we'd want to start with something that feels more comfortable for him. So our first step could look like having him eat a predetermined number of bites of his favorite food at an empty table at school. Yeah. And following...
It could be candy.
Could be candy.
Right, if that's
anything.
Where you start.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Something, and the reason we want it to be their favorite food is because we want them to feel excited about it and something to help motivate them to get started. And following that, we'd want to have them eat a predetermined number of bites of their favorite food away from peers, but at the same table. So if it's a really long table, they could be sitting at the other end of the table. If it's a round table, they could be turned the other way. Some way where they're getting closer to their peers, but not yet where they have to visually see them yet. And following that step, we might want to have the child eat bites of their favorite food amongst peers. So this time having that same, could be the same favorite food, that same size, the same expectation, but this time to actually be eating in front of their peers. And we'd want to keep on moving up that ladder, so our next goal could be having them eat a less preferred lunch item amongst friends. Yeah. So something that maybe isn't candy.
Right.
And maybe we're getting closer to a sandwich or something a bit more lunch-like.
Yes.
And following that, we'd want to have the child taking bites of the school lunch amongst their friends. And we'd want to keep going until they're eating a pretty nice portion meal amongst their friends and without showing distress around it. And some additional things that we also want to think about with eating fears is that we always want to start with their favorite food. So just like we were saying before, this could be candy, it could be a treat, desserts, and we want to identify someone in the school, if we're doing school practice, to be able to prompt this practice for them. So this could be somebody who the child's already comfortable with, somebody that they know, and that's able to give them that positive reinforcement as they're doing the practice. We also want to try our best to find a quiet location with minimal distractions so that there aren't things that might be getting in the way or making it hard for them to keep going.
Yeah.
We've also found it helpful to pre-cut bites so that the child knows exactly what's expected of them, of what they're going to be eating. So if they're eating a sandwich, we might want to cut just a certain amount of bites and let them know these are the amount of bites that you're going to be eating today, and to leave it at that. And we've also found it helpful to do something that the child enjoys while they're doing eating practice. So this could look like playing music, watching a video, something that's a bit distracting, but something that they don't need to really focus on so that they're able to also do the eating practice at the same time.
Yes, distracting games. When you're doing this with your kids, you want to be thinking about anticipating what their reaction is going to be, because sometimes their reaction is just like, whoa, surprises us and we're not ready. So let's talk about possible reactions and then how you're going to formulate your response ahead of time so you're prepared. So when we're doing bravery practice, our kiddos are going to feel anxious. It's part of the process. It's what happens because they're practicing the thing that they're afraid of. And your child might display different behaviors when they're feeling anxious. For some kids, they're teary and crying, and that's how they respond to being anxious, and maybe get a little shut down. For other kids, this could look a little bit more like oppositional behavior, and it might be a little confusing to even recognize that this is a fear, right? So they might have tantrums or outbursts, and to you, it might look like oppositionality, but in reality, this is just their fear response, right? They're not really often refusing, they're just trying to communicate, I'm scared. For other kids, they might do a lot of question asking, and you'll know if this is your child, right? If they're repeating the same questions to you over and over again, saying, are you going to be there? Am I going to be okay? what's going to happen, what's going to look like, even though you've told them the answers many, many times before. No matter what the response, or no matter what your child's response is, your response should really be the same. And that is, you want to be sending a message of empathy and understanding for what they're going through, because they are feeling legitimate fear, right? Yes, it is a hand dryer. What's the big deal? At the same time, they're experiencing fear, just like something else makes you feel afraid. So showing them empathy is a really important piece. But on the other hand, you also want to show them that you're confident they can handle it. So if we're too empathic and we empathize too much, we might miss the point of, yes, but I know you've got this, and sending that message. And Dr. Ellie Leibowitz, who really does a lot of work with kids who have anxiety disorders, does a really fantastic job of coming up with a great statement that you can state to your kids when they're feeling anxious or have tantruming, or really at any point, which is, I know this is hard for you, but I know you can handle it. That's what you want to be sending the message of to your kids during these moments. Another really important thing to talk to them about, or to remind them of during this time, is that they're going to be getting reinforcement and that you're praising them. So any small step, we praise. If little Johnny's afraid of using public restrooms and he is not even going near that stall, but he takes one step closer to it, that is worthy of praise and that is worthy of excitement. And if you give it the praise and if you give the excitement, there's a much greater likelihood that Johnny's going to take the next step and the next and the next until he gets to his goal. So it's really important that you're just aware of what your child's response is going to be, and you formulate a great response and you are ready for whatever it's going to be. So, questions. We have a lot of questions that we get asked about this topic.
So one question that we've been asked from many parents is that my child's afraid of the hand dryer in the bathroom. How do I handle this? So this is pretty common for children who are more sensitive to sound, loud noises, things that are unexpected. And we really want to use our Bravery ladder to help gradually expose them to the sound. So what we might want to do is even starting with playing the sound for them in a safer place, or a place where they're not actually in the bathroom. So this could be done at home at a lower volume, and then gradually taking steps to increasing that to get them practicing this in the bathroom, and then eventually when they're doing this, when it's happening unexpectedly. And another question that we have is, my child is an extremely picky eater. How do I help them overcome this? So this is a really common complaint that we hear from parents. And the main thing is that we want to distinguish between typical pickiness or something that's more of a concern and needs additional support and attention. So generally, we like to say that if we could count on one hand all the food that the child eats, that might be an indicator that they might need some more support and attention from a local treatment provider. For kids who are just picky, which is pretty common and can be age appropriate for younger kids, and we want to make sure that we're not forcing foods on them or making them eat certain things, and also be open to knowing that part of this is really developmental and part of their age and trying new things and getting used to different tastes and textures. And we can use similar strategies like our Bravery ladder to help make it fun and rewarding, and to help slowly exposing them to new foods and tastes.
Yeah. So not forcing, but trying is a really important piece of this. Always presenting the option and making it really exciting to try.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you.
And if you would like any more information or resources, you can visit childmind.org.